So, good evening, everybody. And once again, we are back with day 10 of this initiative of Civils Daily for daily answer writing and daily answer writing prime. So, good evening, Nisha. Good evening, Shweta. Good evening, Harji. So, again, in the morning, we had given you a question, and it was pretty, I will say, like a simple question, but a very important topic because Gandhiji is always important for from UPSC perspective. So it was a question from modern Indian history, and I think all of you have attempted quite well. And I've gone through some of the answers and some of the peer reviews that you are doing, so that has been pretty satisfactory from our end. And I think you will continue doing that. So now in this session, we will try to discuss that question and again move on to checking some of the copies that you have submitted before 2 p.m. Also, I will emphasize that please try to submit your copies before 2 p.m. because we need to put some rule and we need to make you guys a bit consistent because submitting at any time will not result in that consistency. So if you submit the copies before 2 p.m., we will try to pick up your copies and evaluate it in this session itself. So now let us move towards discussing the question that was given today. So it was about shed light on Gandhian objectives towards India's upliftment, and after that you had also to examine India's progress in realizing these objectives. So basically, again, there were 3-4 core demands of this question that you had to fulfill, and this question had a lot of content that you could write because I think you must have gone through many aspects of Gandhiji's life and his teachings and his like contribution to the Indian freedom struggle. Also, this question is important from ethics point of view because in ethics also a question can be asked along these lines. So from that perspective also this question becomes important, and here you had basically to write about some of the core objectives of Gandhiji, like 4 or 5 core objectives were there which you had to mention in this question compulsorily. So that was the first demand of this question, and after that you had to examine India's progress. Now in examining India's progress, you cannot say that we have achieved all of Gandhiji's objectives because we are still a far way behind, and Gandhiji still inspires a lot of us, a lot of our leaders, and our progress towards a equitable society and all. So first, you had to mention some of the achievements in that direction that we have achieved till now. 4 points regarding that, and next you had to talk about some of the some points where we have failed to achieve his objectives or we are lacking behind. So those 3-4 points should also have been mentioned. So this was basically the core demand of the question. First talking about some of the Gandhian objectives, next talking about India's progress and where we are lacking, and other than this, just introduction and conclusion was required in this answer. 15 marks question was this was a 15 marker question, so all of these points could be written in some amount of detail. Although you could not write like a lot of things, but still, for example, when you talk about Gandhian objectives, you can substantiate it through some of his achievements during the freedom struggle or some of the examples that we saw during the struggle, which was inspired by Gandhiji's philosophy and Gandhiji's way of life. So let us move on to discussing what we could have written in this answer. So I'll start with introducing the answer. So I have talked about like the prime objective of Gandhiji was attaining independence for India. So this we all know. So I have begun with talking about that only. According to Gandhiji, independence of India should not just mean independence from the foreign rule. It also involves freedom from servitude of casteism, patriarchy, capitalism, etc. Now Gandhiji's views were quite broad. Just independence was one of the main objectives, but it was not the only objectives. He has a lot of a big body of work towards casteism, removing patriarchy. He was against capitalism, you can say. He was against the materialistic society and all of that. So you can just mention that independence, although was the primary goal, but it was not the only goal. Other goals include getting India freedom from casteism, patriarchy, capitalism, etc. So this introduction also indicates that what we are going to write in the next part. So therefore I have picked up this introduction. Otherwise you could have just if you were not not capable to write this thing, like you were not remembering this and all, you could have just talked about the time and space of Gandhiji. You could have just mentioned a fact from Gandhi's life that he came to India in 1915 and he was like the leader, the mass leader of the Indian national movement. And after that, you can write a linking statement that his goals were pretty broad and which included like getting independence, getting freedom from casteism, women empowerment, making India making Indian politics a bit stateless. So all of those things you could have written as a linking statement. But I think if I go on to talk about all of those in one introduction, it will become quite long. So I've just gone on for talking about independence of India being his primary goal, but not the only goal. It also involves freedom from casteism, patriarchy, capitalism, etc. After that, I have moved on to talking about the main core objectives of Gandhiji. Now you had to mention some of the keywords here. For example, this Swaraj, you had to mention Swadeshi, you had to mention Sarvodaya, you had to mention Satyagraha, you had to mention. So these were the keywords basically for this answer. Avoiding these will result in loss of marks. So I will suggest that you should mention these. And if you had a core grasp of these keywords, I think it was enough for you to explain what it all meant. For example, I started with Swaraj because it is a bit linked to independence of India. But Swaraj was not only talking about independence of India; it was about independence of self from evils also, like self transformation and self discipline. Like we all of us have pretty much evils imbibed under us, so we need to become free from those evils. So Swaraj incorporated that concept also. So Swaraj is self government for social transformation. One of its ideas was self government, like freedom from British rule. But again, it also included self transformation. So I've talked about that. Next point is about widening non-hierarchical structure of concentric circles with different tier of government deriving strength from each other. So Gandhiji was very big on panchayati rule and all. Even the 73rd and 74th amendment of Indian Constitution is like inspired from Gandhiji's idea of panchayati raj. So he was not in the favor of like a top-down approach of governance. So Swaraj meant like if every tier of government was like governing itself. So it will become like rule of every tier of government for itself. Everyone will rule themselves. So that was the basic meaning of Swaraj. So both these concepts I've tried to include here. You could have mentioned some examples if you wanted to. Next, I went on to talk about Swadeshi. Now, Gandhiji Swadeshi was a call of use of Indian products. He was against like this westernization and western materialism and all. So Gandhiji Swadeshi is a call to the consumer to be aware of the violence caused by supporting certain industries which result in exploitation, inequality and harm to environment. And at that time, when during Gandhiji's time, even labor laws were not like pretty decent. A lot of exploitation was there, especially in the industrial arena. So most of the people, the poor people, were exploited a lot. There was a lot of inequality. Work hours were pretty long, and there were no like leaves. So all of that contributed to Gandhiji's thought of supporting like Swadeshi and not supporting the foreign capitalists. So you could talk about that. Next, he also wanted India to become self-reliant. So he promoted cottage industries. For example, you can see the charkha industry, the khadi industry, and Gandhiji was pretty much in support of this. He also himself spun. So you can mention those examples here if you wanted. He promoted cottage industries in rural areas to make them self-sufficient and popularized khadi to make India self-reliant. So these were one of the core objectives of Gandhiji. Next is about Sarvodaya. So Sarvodaya basically means that upliftment of everyone. So even the poorest of poor should be uplifted. So that was Sarvodaya, basically rising of all. So that is what I have tried to explain here. All should rise. This is basically the literal meaning of Sarvodaya. Not a few as in capitalism, or even the greatest good of the greatest number as in socialism. So this was not Gandhiji's philosophy. Now, greatest good of greatest number means taking such actions or doing such things which promote the good of the maximum number of people. But Gandhiji was not in favor of that. He wanted to promote the good of all. So even if one or two persons dignity was harmed in certain activity, he was against those activities. So he was big on like he wanted to achieve the ends through proper means. He could not ignore even the lowest of the low or the poorest of the poor. So Sarvodaya was basically about that only. Each and everyone should be taken care of. Example is like trusteeship model. Next, upliftment of suppressed caste. So again, in this domain also, Gandhiji worked a lot for like uplifting the Harijans. He started this Harijan Sevak Sangh to inspire constructive social work for their empowerment. So guys, you can just try to mention whatever points you mentioned. Just try to give one or two examples from the from the life of Gandhiji that shows his work in that direction. So because this is not a proper GS4 answer, so you just can give some examples to keep your answer like history specific. Next, we move on to gender equality. Gandhiji was also in favor of gender equality. He said that to call a woman a weaker sex is a libel. His non-violent struggle invoked moral strength of women, triggering major participation of women in public life in the civil disobedience movement. Now, civil disobedience movement (CDM) saw a lot of participation of women. Even Gandhiji's ashram had a lot of women. So he was again in favor of Gandhiji was in favor of gender equality. A lot of women were participating on the call of Gandhiji in these major mass movements. Even during Quit India movement, you see a lot of participation of women. So you can talk about that and give those examples. And next, one of the most important principles of Gandhiji's life was satyagraha. Like he was not in favor of violence, so non-violence and truth were cardinal principles for him. He withdrew non-cooperation movement when Chori Chora incident happened. So again, this is an example. I'm trying to link his objectives with some of the examples from his life. Till today, protests in India emphasize non-violence. So his principle is useful in raising voice against injustice, corruption, social evils, but without hatred. So this concept of satyagraha was not hating the enemy, but it was like converting the hearts of the enemy was the core principle of this satyagraha. So he wanted to convert the enemy, make them understand, make them convinced that the means of the enemy is not good and the means of the satyagrahi is good. So that was his core principle. So raising voice against injustice, but you have to mention that without hatred, resort to arms or disturbance of public order. So these were I think the most important four principles that you needed to mention: Satyagraha, Sarvodaya, Swadeshi, and Swaraj. All four S. After that, if you have written all of this, I think that was sufficient enough for talking about Gandhiji's objectives. Next, you can move on to talking about application of his objectives, like how far India has achieved those. So India has realized the Gandhian objectives in certain respects as discussed below. So again, I move on talking about all these points and what all we have achieved. For example, Satyagraha, India has like Constitution was enacted and constitutional morality is one of the important principles of the Constitution. Affirmative actions are there in the Constitution itself to undo historical justice. So again, this is based on the principle of Satyagraha, that the truth of historical injustice should be accepted and we should do something to like uplift the poor or the section which are marginalized sections which have suffered for long. Next, I talk about Sarvodaya. So again, many of Government of India's policies are inspired from Sarvodaya. For example, this National Food Security Act, Right to Education, Antyodaya. All of these are drawn from Sarvodaya. That is, they profess development of even the poorest of the poor. So you can talk about these policies. It is not necessary to mention like these only. You can mention whatever you feel is good or fits in this context. So I don't think that you need to be pretty specific about the examples, but two or three examples need to be mentioned. Like some of the government schemes you can mention here. In inclusive development also I have just done the same. I have talked about development of women and children. Here you can talk about the development of marginalized caste schemes for like scholarship schemes for scheduled caste, scheduled tribe children, students and all. You can talk about those things. I have talked about PM Vatsalya Yojana, Matru Vandana Yojana. This is for children, like protection of children who are suffering, and Matru Vandana Yojana is for women. So these two things I have talked about. Also, there is 1/3 reservation in local government for women. So this also indicates inclusive development that is taking place in India. Next, talk about Gram Swaraj. So here, this is pretty important. You should have mentioned this, and this is very common also. So you could not afford to miss it. Like 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Act provide local self-government for democratic decentralization. Next is about Swadeshi. So now India has achieved self-sufficiency in food. India lifted 271 million people out of poverty between 2006 and 2016. So this decade was pretty much praised. Everyone, like all the global institutions praised India for lifting so many people out of poverty in one decade. And again, recent policies like here you can talk about Atmanirbhar Bharat also, Make in India, production linked incentives, all of this like promote, give incentives for production in India and promoting Indian products. You can also talk about like procurement from Indian MSMEs, 25% procurement in government ESUs have been mandate has been made mandatory from Indian MSMEs. So those things you can talk about here when we talk about Swadeshi. So these were the 3-4 points. Again, you could have mentioned some different points also, but ensure that you mention 4-5 points on these lines. Next, some of the objectives that have been unrealized. If we go on to talk about that, we can talk about rising inequality. This is one of the core things, one of the core problems that India faces today. According to Oxfam, top 10% rich population holds 73% of the wealth. Now, Gandhiji was against this because one of his core principles is sarvodia, that is upliftment of all, even the poorest of poor, and this is against that. So you can talk about this. Next, gram panchayats have also been formed, but they are not functional pretty well. There are a lot of deficiencies. You could mention one or two of them. I have decided to talk about sarpanch pati here because even when women are elected, like they are not the actual, they are not the people who have actual power in their hand. The sarpanch patis or the husbands of such women try to govern the gram panchayats and all. So you can talk about that. Criminalization of politics is rampant at all levels. So Gandhiji was against it. This also, like one of his core principle was politics with ethics. He did not want politics just for the sake of politics. Politics should have a component of ethics, and criminalization of politics is totally against it. So you can talk about this. Next is about regionalism, communalism, parochial outlooks, undercut duties as responsible citizens. So Gandhiji was also in favor of citizens performing their duty and against communalism, regionalism, all of these things Gandhiji was against. He was in the favor of uniting India. A lot of work he has done is in favor of uniting India. Even when Dr. Ambedkar like was in favor of electorates for separate electorates, Gandhiji opposed it, and he did not want any division on any lines. So you can talk about these things that raises its ugly head from time to time in India. Next, we talk about freedom and democracy. So again, Gandhiji was also big on democracy. He did not want some authoritarian or state power. Basically, he even did not want state like India. He just wanted a stateless society with local governance. So that was his basic idea. But that has not been achieved in India. So you can talk about that and you can give some examples. Here I have decided to give the example of Ketaki Chitale. Like she was arrested for doing a social media post against the Maharashtra government of that time, like 1.5 years ago. So you can talk about that. Freedom and democracy are yet to become a way of life. So these were the basic things that you needed to talk about. I think here also I have mentioned 5 points. So that makes the answer like pretty rich also content wise. All these 3 parts needed to be addressed in detail. Just mentioning these words would not cut it. You have to mention the keywords along with explaining some of the points and giving some of the examples, because this is not a 10 marker. A 15 marker question will expect you to discuss some of the things that you have written. After that, you could have just concluded. I have went on to conclude talking about again some of the key principles of Gandhiji. Gandhiji's life and his principles remain potent guide for social transformation and moral upliftment. Avoiding Gandhiji's 7 sins and taking guidance from Gandhiji's talisman in our personal and professional life can help make India the nation he dreamt of. So you must have heard about this. Both of these are pretty common. Gandhiji's talisman is written in the first page of all our NCRT books. That is, whenever you are suffering, you can remember the face of the poorest person you ever encountered, along something along those lines. So you can talk about Gandhiji's talisman, so that can act as a guide for our personal and professional achievement. And also Gandhiji had described 7 sins, 7 social sins, which he was against of. So 7 social sins, if I go on to talk about, I can like these were the 7 social sins that Gandhiji talked about: wealth without work, pleasure without conscience, knowledge without character, commerce without morality, science without humanity, religion without sacrifice, and politics without principle. So, if you are wealthy but you are not working, and without work you have like unethically you have gained wealth, so that is a sin. you are enjoying pleasure, but if your conscience is not right, so that pleasure is not that pleasure is sinful. So these things basically were the seven sins that Gandhiji described. So I have used them to conclude my answer, like avoiding Gandhiji's seven sins and taking guidance from Gandhiji's talisman in our personal and professional life can help make India the nation he dreamt of. So I think that is enough for a 15 marker answer. And most of you have written answer along these lines only, but there are some deficiencies. Some of the answers, I will pick up now some of the answers and see what all you could have bettered or written better. So let us move to talking about some of the copies. If you have any doubts, you can ask in the this chat box. Sir, can you please tell me the time of this initiative, and can we get the question in the Telegram group of Sales Daily? Diksha, we have the Telegram group. I will send you the link, and you can. I think the link is in the description of this channel, so you can just join the Telegram group, and we actually conduct all the questions and answer copies. Send the answer copies, good copies there only. So that will be pretty useful for you. And the timing is like in the morning around 10:30, 10:35. We post the question, and in the evening around 7 we take this evaluation and feedback session. Just join the Telegram group, and everything will be clear. You can submit the answers in Telegram group itself, Diksha. Good evening, Saira. So now let us move to talking about some of the evaluations. So this is Sahiba's copy. Let us see what she has written. Said light on Gandhi. Okay, fine. Mahatma Gandhi was the greatest leader of the Indian independence movement. Gandhi was a lawyer, nationalist, and anti-colonial activist. He led a non-violent mass movement against the British rule of India, which ultimately resulted in Indian independence. So this is fine, like describing Gandhiji, but you can just write a linking statement here, like what you are going to write. Try to indicate a bit about that. Like his main goal was independence, but some of his other goals are like these. So Gandhian objectives towards India's upliftment is okay. Non-violence or ahimsa in the foundational principle of Gandhism. Ahimsa is not avoid of violence, but it is a much deeper in sense. Okay, based on love, sacrifice, and fraternity. Find truth or satya is the pivotal element or objective of Gandhism. Satyagraha, according to him, satyagraha is the battle between good and evil. Satyagraha is against evil, not evil doer. So I think again here what you can do is satyagraha is the core concept that includes truth and non-violence. So first you mention satyagraha, then mention truth and non-violence as the sub points for satyagraha. You need not write three different points for I think the same thing. Satyagraha basically means satya agraha. Satya is like force of truth, or force of truth is what it literally means. So Sakti is already included in Satyagraha. So you can talk about Satyagraha first, like this should be the main point, and then after that you can give these sub points about truth and non-violence. Nai Talim education are manifested in Nai Talim. Okay, according to him, education should be a lifelong process. This is okay. Swaraj, okay, fine. Gandhiji gave it the content of an integral revolution that encompasses all spheres of life. Self-rule, self-restraint could be equated with moksha or salvation. Okay, fine. Swadeshi, focus on acting within and from one's own community, both politically and economically. Here you can just what you can do is like give some examples. For example, you can talk about khadi, charkha, spinning wheel here in Swadeshi. And again, when you talk about truth and non-violence, you can give the example of non-cooperation movement, civil disobedience movement. So try picking examples from Gandhiji's life to enrich your answer. That will enrich your content, although your concept is fine. But if you give some examples, that will make it a bit better. Trusteeship is fine in this. Wealthy people should be the trustees of trust that looked after the welfare of the people. Okay, so here first you can talk about sarvodia. So that is the main concept, and trusteeship comes under that only, like upliftment of all the poor and all the sections of society. And trusteeship is basically sharing profits among all rather than the capitalist class making all the profits. So you can talk about that. Rest of the points are fine. Include some examples for better better content. India's progress in realizing Gandhian objectives in social issues, the ideals of truth and non-violence serve as an antidote to the social, okay, fine, relevant to all humankind. So again, try to, for example, when you are talking about India's progress, mention some of the things that India has done, so that you can indicate the progress. Now, if, for example, if we are a country which has not progressed in truth and non-violence, you can still write this point, because this is a very generic point from an ethics point of view. You can always say that we follow the ideals of truth and non-violence, but give some examples which show the following of truth and non-violence by India. You can talk about the constitution, because our constitution is one of the best constitutions of the world, and there are provisions for affirmative action and all, and solving all kind of disputes through non-violence. So you can mention that example here. Khadi and village industries are fine here. Try to talk about more recent points, because you can talk, okay, Atmanirbhar or self-reliant Bharat is fine. Talk about Make in India and all of those things. You can mention those cottage industries can be mentioned. Technique of mobilizing people, Gandhian concept of basic education, Nai Talim. So here again you can talk about new education policy, but I will say that go for more important, like give some government schemes here to show the progress. You can talk about removal of poverty. You can talk about National Food Security Act. You can talk about right to education. So all of those are Gandhian objectives. Again, here one of the main points that you have missed is, I think 73rd. Okay, you have mentioned here the idea of Gram Swaraj at domestic level is fine. Mention 73rd, 74th Amendment. The idea of interdependence, Swadeshi, collaboration and cooperation among nations, make progress in poverty, global challenges, etc. In economic issues, idea of uplifting and empowering poor towards inclusive and so give example, like give the data point here. So to make it better, decentralized planning, Sarvodaya is okay, lending impetus to the concept of vocal for local or sabka saath sabka vikas. It is fine. Idea of self-sufficiency. So you have got it, like main points you have understood, and you have also got the concept fine. But try to include again examples from the progress that India has made. Try to include some data points and some government schemes and all to make this part look better. For example, rather than explaining a lot of things, if you include those points, that will show that what progress India has done or what all India has achieved. Just like this becomes a bit preachy if you just keep on writing about what all. This is again like basically about talking about objectives only. So if you can include some of those data points and examples, that will be better. Thus, it can be said that Gandhiji was the leader of the past into the present and marches towards the future. Okay, his ideologies are relevant and important today more than ever before, not only for India but also. So this is also fine introduction. Conclusion. But again, I think you have missed the like non-achievements part. You can also mention that we have not achieved all of Gandhiji's objectives, and we are still a far way behind. Not only not achieved, we are still a far way behind. So give some examples, like 4 5 points in that favor also. Like here the question is asking you to examine. It is not just saying that mm, India has realized these objectives and comment. If it says that India has realized these objectives and comment, then you can talk about just the positive aspects. But when it is saying you to examine, it means that you need to analyze it a bit, like what all, whether India has achieved or not. So both sides of the coin should be shown here. So I think that is it for your answer. Some examples, some data points, and one missing section. If you could have added, it will make this answer better. So overall, I think you will get still 4.5 out of 15 for this answer, Sahiba. Next, we move to this is perhaps Dhanyata's copy. Let us see what she has written. Mahatma Gandhi ji was one of the greatest thinker, political guide, and philosopher that India had witnessed. Fine, he had many objectives towards India's upliftment, like okay, fine, upliftment of poor and vulnerable and an egalitarian society with no class division. Sarvodaya, fine, he was against untouchability and campaigned heavily against it during his course of time. Okay, Gandhiji believed in tolerance and in between religions. What is this? I don't get it. In between religions for the growth of the nation. He believes India lives in her villages to grow as a nation. First, villages should be developed. This is fine. Women empowerment is one of his prime motives. Many women like Sarojini Naidu, Usha Mehta participated. Okay, fine. He focused on cleanliness and hygiene at both individual and societal level. So again, okay, but I think uh, some of the keywords are missing. You should mention Satyagraha, Sarvodaya, Swadeshi. So basically, those were the key themes that Gandhiji weaved his policy around. If you omit those 4 5 words, it will the answer will seem a bit hollow. So if you need to mention those, and then you can use these things to explain. For example, when you have talked about Sarvodaya, you can mention these 2 points there. Next, you can talk about Swadeshi and all. You can talk about Swaraj. When you talk about Swaraj, you can talk about independence, village, self-sufficiency of village rule, self-transformation, and all. So all of that can be mentioned. In inclusive development, again, you can talk about woman empowerment. So you can just pick up those keywords and try to explain along those lines. Also, for example, this example is good. So try to include such examples in all parts of your answer. That will make it better. India's progress in realizing these objectives. Government of India has come up with schemes like fine, this is okay. The constitution itself has Article 17, which is right against untouchability. Fine, India is a secular republic and all religion are equal. Fine. 73rd Amendment and Democrat. Fine, this is also okay. Women in India are breaking the glass ceiling by progressing. So this part is pretty good. I will say you have given some examples also. Government has come up with Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, so this is also good. Though India is working on different fronts to realize Gandhian objectives, there are some shortfalls. Okay, act of untouchability, fine. Communal violence is also good. Female labor participation is also good. Pollution. Okay, through though there are limitations, India is striving towards achieving Gandhian objectives, and to achieve it completely, all stakeholders like government, civil society, people should come together as one unit and achieve the goal of India's upliftment. So I think the second part of your answer is pretty good. Some of the examples. So if you improve the first part of the answer, I think this answer will become better. Otherwise, this is a decent answer. Second part is pretty good. 4.5 out of 15 is what you will get. Next, I move to Nisha's copy. Gandhian. He is a modern thinker. His objectives exist on several principles: the spiritual, religious, moral, political, economic, social, individual, and collective. So these first two words, Gandhian was a Gandhiji or Mahatma Gandhi, you can mention. I think the first word is not quite compatible here. So you can improve that. Gandhian objectives towards India's upliftment. Economic objective is fine. Sarvodaya, upliftment of all, universal uplift. Swaraj, self-developed, dependent. Social objective, trusteeship. Panchayati Raj, fine. Morality of politics, okay. Collective objective, satyagrah. Truth and non-violence. India's progress in realizing. So again, I will say that. So this is one of the key parts of the question. Like one section of the question is completely dedicated towards talking about Gandhian objectives. So I think you need to address it in a bit of detail. Like your like core points are good. You have also mentioned the keywords, but just go for mentioning some of the examples and talking a bit in detail. For example, Swaraj can be explained a bit better. Just self-dependent is not enough. Talk about India's independence, independence of self from evils and all. Panchayati, like self-governance of villages. You can talk about all of those things in Swaraj. So try explaining a bit more all of these points with some examples. India's progress, economic is fine. Atmanirbhar Bharat PDS scheme, okay, fine. Social objective, trusteeship, land reforms, and progressive taxation, fine. Pollution. What is this? Panchayati Raj, okay. Political objective, 70, fine. This is okay. Individual objective, truth and non-violence. India is largest democracy along with secular. So here you can talk about constitution and all. Education, he said, education is essential for the attainment of the goal of, example, new education policy. So this is again good, but again try to mention some more government schemes and some data points. For example, you can talk about upliftment of 270 million people from poverty and all. You can talk about right to education. You can talk about food security or other than PDS. So these things you can try to mention here. You can mention about uh, affirmative action for the marginalized sections, reservation for the marginalized sections, or even some of the schemes you can mention. You can talk about some of the schemes that are for women and children. So those things, try to make it a bit like include everything in your answer. Try to give some examples. Try to talk about some points. So since this is a 15 marker, you have the scope to do this. If it were a 10 marker, just talking about the main themes would have been enough. But when this is a 15 marker, try to enrich your content a bit. India's challenges in realizing these objectives, the top 10%, okay, fine. According to India Inequality Report, this is so these 2 points are basically same. So you can talk about that in same point only. No need to mention it along other lines. Panchayati Raj is also fine. This is good. School dropout children number has increased. Lack of good quality education and trained teacher. This is good. So Gandhi's objective towards India's upliftment has fully by our own active principles. I don't fully. I You can write these a bit better. I don't get it what you have written. MC Chagla said if all directive principles are carried out, our country would indeed be a heaven on earth. So this is fine. Again, conclusion is decent. Intro is also good. But again, the content can be a bit better, especially the first part. And the second part also can be a bit better. You can give some examples and include some data points to make your content rich. And this first part, you need to explain explain it a bit in detail, Nisha. So 4.5 out of 15 is what you will get for this answer, Nisha. Next, we move to Nishan's copy. 2nd October every year is a great day for India as well as for the world. On this day, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi and International Day for Non-Violence is observed to pay respect and Gandhianism starts with simple living and high thinking, and its objectives towards other follows truth and non-violence. So I think better than this is a decent introduction. I think your writing style is good, but talk about Gandhiji from the perspective of history, like his important role in India's independence. rather than talking about like 2nd October and all. This is fine, but it will be better if you can talk about Gandhiji's core objective of attaining independence for India, his core contributions, and then this line can be mentioned as the linking statement. So truth and non-violence, again you can mention satyagraha here. So again these 2 points are basically similar. Satyagraha is about truth and non-violence and overcoming the enemy through truth and non-violence. So you can first mention satyagraha and then talk about these things there. Sarvodaya is fine, universal uplift or progress for all. Here you can again mention about some of the things that Gandhiji did during his tenure. For example, you can talk about his crusade against untouchability. You can talk about Harijan Sevak Sangh. All of those things can be mentioned here. Swaraj is fine, means self-rule. Trusteeship is also okay. Trusteeship is a social economic philosophy that was propounded by Gandhiji. Swadeshi, Swa means self or own, and Desh means one's own country. So okay, again, in Swadeshi only you can talk about trusteeship. You can again give some examples of from Gandhiji's life when you talk about Swadeshi and all. So again, some examples are missing. Otherwise, this answer is decent. Like you have at least used all the keywords and all. So if you can do that, it will become a bit better. India's progress in realizing these objectives. Truth, civil services, truthfulness, and self-public fine, peace, stability in the world, the great weapon of Gandhiji during British rule for freedom of India, secularism. India is a secular state, Gandhian socialism, Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan, and universal healthcare. So this is fine. Decentralization, look, okay. Cleanliness is also fine. Sustainable environment is also fine. Okay, so I will say that last 4 points are pretty good, but these first 2-3 points are a bit preachy. Like peace, stability in the world is okay, but give some examples from India, which India has taken to establish peace, stability in world. You can mention the example of non-alliance movement (NAM) here, to show that India was always in favor of peace and tried to broker peace between different countries and all. Civil services is also fine, but go for talking about uh, upliftment of the poor, like uplifting people from poverty, some of the government schemes and all. Last 3-4 points are pretty good, but again you have not mentioned the those things that India have failed to achieve or the drawbacks, like the non-achievements of Gandhian objectives. So that section can also be mentioned. After that, Gandhi's political contributions offered us independence, and their ideology is still relevant in making India progressive and sustainable. Okay, fine. So conclusion is again decent. In introduction, you can improve it a bit by talking about Gandhi's contributions towards independence movement and his core goal of independence. After that, in this section, you can just organize it a bit better. Satyagraha and all keywords are fine. Use some examples and try to understand that you will not get benefits if you write the same thing in 2-3 points. Just mention a main heading and then go for writing some sub points under that only. For example, truth and non-violence here can be mentioned under this point only, and all rest of the answer is good. These 3-4 points that you have written in the end are also good. Just first 2-3 points can be improved a bit better, and conclusion is fine, but you have missed the non achievements. So I think that will result in loss of some marks. So I think you will get again 4.5 out of 15, because overall if you could have mentioned that section on non achievements, I think you would have got some more marks. Now let us move to Sushma's copy. MK Gandhi was the most prominent leader of pre-independence and post-independence India who changed the course of history during the Indian freedom struggle. Okay, fine. Pioneer. Okay, this is good introduction. I'll say Gandhian objectives towards India's upliftment. Swaraj, self-rule. This is good. Sarvodaya. Okay, again, try to mention some examples here. For Sarvodaya, you can talk about untouchability. You can talk about Harijan Sevak Sangh. So all of those things can be mentioned here. So they see strong in self. Okay, this is fine. So here again some examples can be mentioned. Satyagraha, it means exercise of purest soul force against all injustice. So this is also good. Truth and non-violence. Truth is pivotal. So this can be again mentioned under Satyagraha only. Foundational principle of Gandhism. Ahimsa is non-using. Okay, fine. So here you can again talk about NCM, non-cooperation movement, CDM. So all of those things can be mentioned here. In Satyagraha, truth and non-violence. India's progress in realizing Gandhian objectives, political sense. So this is okay. Panchayati Raj, economic sense, Khadi and Village Commission, self-sufficiency. Give some decent schemes. Talk about Make in India. Talk about production linked incentive. Talk about Atmanirbhar Bharat here. Social sense, Gandhi concept of basic education. So okay, fine. Universal healthcare is also okay. Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan is fine. Skill India programs is also good. Recent Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, biggest cleanliness. Respect for women, literacy ideas are Gandhi's principles. So this is good. Gandhi's contribution offered us independence, but his ideologies enlightened India as well as the world even today after so many years. every individual that should follow the key Gandhian. So again, you have not talked about what all India is still lacking. So like when you are asked to examine, I think you should examine both the sides of the coin. So the non-progress of India in achieving some of the objectives can be mentioned in this answer. Otherwise, your answer is pretty decent. The first part is also good, I will say. Just mention some examples. So overall, I think and your introduction and conclusion is good. So I'll say you will get 5 out of 15 for this answer, Sushma. Try to include some more examples in this first part. Relate with events from Gandhiji's life or like India's freedom struggle. Relate these points with that. And in the second part, also try to talk about some of the areas where we are lacking in achieving Gandhiji's objectives. That will make this answer complete. So 5 out of 15 is what you will get for this answer. So that will be it for today, guys. I think I have reviewed some of the copies, and again, tomorrow we will meet and pick up some more copies and a new topic. Uh, Meanwhile, if you have any doubts, you can again ask me in the chat box. Please tell the name of the channel. Not able to open the link from the description. It is CD War Zone. I think Diksha, it is CD War Zone. Okay, I will attach it in the comment box. Don't worry. After the session, I will attach it in the comment box. You can open the link from there. So again, we will be posting some of the good copies after this session in the Telegram group, and you can update your notes. And if there are not some good copies are absent, I'll try to put the PDF. If you want the PDF, you can say me here in the chat box. I will try to put the PDF of the answer in the comment box itself. So best of luck, guys. Keep answer writing, and again we'll meet tomorrow. Keep participating in the night owl discussions also. Now prelims is also approaching, so try to be active there also. Keep brushing your concepts and all, and we will meet again tomorrow for a new topic and discussing some new ideas of answer writing. So thank you very much, and again we will meet tomorrow. So thank you, guys.